In a national forest thick with old infrastructure, there is a retired fire lookout tower listed on maps as inactive. Jonah hiked there on a weekday in late fall, when the sky stayed low, and the light made everything look like wet pewter. The road to the trailhead had heaved with frost over the years, and when he parked, he thought about how much he didn't want to change a tire in this air. The trail was an old access path that climbed in switchbacks through fir and spruce. A rope of cloud lay along the ridge, weirdly level, like an ocean seen from below. The lookout tower emerged as a black geometry against it. 4 legs, cross-bracing, a box room on top with glass for walls, and a catwalk around it. A metal ladder led to a locked hatch. A sign said, "Structure unsafe, do not climb." He circled the base, taking pictures of the engineering and the way Lycan had made a map of the north leg. He was alone except for the wind. On the leeward side, he found the old service shed with its door half off. Inside were mouse nests and paper, oil stains, a coffee can full of rusted nails, and a binder swollen with rain. He flipped through it and found weather logs from the late 1980s. The pages were tidy: date, temperature, wind, remarks. The remarks were what caught him. A hand, the same one for months at a time, had written things like smoke column 240 AZ and helicopter 3 pass. Then there were entries that didn't belong in weather. October 6, heard whistling in Endraw. Checked, no person visible. October 8, mimicry, outside station after light out, sounded like radio. October 10, do not answer. He looked back at the tower and felt, for the first time that day, that peculiar loneliness that knows it is being measured. He slid the binder under his jacket because he didn't want rain to finish the work of mice. He told himself he'd leave it at the ranger station if he could find someone to care. He ate his sandwich, leaning against the leeward leg, where the wind made a harp of the steel. When he started down the trail, the fog thickened. He passed a spur he hadn't noticed on the way up, a faint trace through Huckleberry leading to the north. He checked his map app. It showed a dashed line once used for supply runs. On impulse, and because he had hours before dark, he followed it. The spur bent around the mountain into a shallow basin. The fog pooled there, making the world a small room with white walls. He heard, very faintly, the crackle of a radio old VHF chatter, the kind he had listened to as a kid when his uncle was a volunteer firefighter. He stopped and listened harder. The words weren't words, just syllables shaped like them, snapped and hissed. He moved slowly forward until the basin opened onto a clearing with a concrete pad. 4 bolts stuck up where a small building had once been. In the center, wrapped in a plastic bag that had yellowed in the sun, cracked in the cold, was a handheld radio with a cable to a dead battery. It shouldn't have worked, but as Jonah approached, it made a stuttering breath of static and then formed a voice. "Look out! Station calling. Come back." He stood with one hand hovering above the set. The voice was wrong, like it had learned the shape of a transmission from listening, not from speaking. He reached down and turned the volume knob. It made the expected scratch. He keyed the mic without meaning to, muscle memory from borrowed rigs. "Station, this is," he began, and the radio cut him off by repeating his words in his cadence. This is," then swallowing its tail. He turned the radio off. It continued to hiss, then settled. He took a slow step back, then another. Somewhere in the fog, a foot slid on gravel. He didn't run. He walked with a pace he could turn into a sprint if he had to, and he spoke aloud in an ordinary voice because sometimes pretending is the only rope over a hole. "No signal out here," he said to the air. "Dead battery. I'll take it down to the station." Ahead, the spur narrowed between young firs. The fog pressed close enough that branches beaded water on his sleeves. He thought he saw a shape move to parallel him on the right, then on the left, always at the edge of vision, like a person keeping a polite distance. At the main trail, he turned downhill. The fog thinned to the kind that turns branches into dripping ink drawings. He didn't look back. He descended switchbacks he recognized, past the big boulder that looked like a sleeping animal, and saw his car through trees like a small black punctuation mark. Relief arrived too early, and because it arrived, it was punished. On the driver's side window, written in the film of mist and road dust, with one clean finger, were the words, "Don't answer." The same caps as the binder, the same bunched urgency. He unlocked the car with a fob and put the binder on the passenger seat, laying the radio on top of it without thinking. The radio, dead and bagged, made a little inhale and then said, in his voice, "Don't answer." Then it repeated the words again, in another voice, laced with static, as if someone very far away had tried to say them and time had chewed up the edges. He drove out reckless, tires skidding on the frost heaves, the antenna guy wire on the tower singing in his mind. He didn't stop until he hit the county road and cell bars came in. He pulled over and took a picture of the binder's pages, then put the binder and the radio in the trunk because he couldn't stand them in the cabin with him. He sat with the engine running and watched wind tear at a line of weeds until his hand stopped shaking enough to dial. At the ranger station, a woman with the soft power of someone who had hauled water by hand for years listened like she'd heard everything twice. He put the binder on the counter. He didn't mention the radio. She paged through the logs, paused at October, and sighed. "They wrote things down that weren't for the file," she said. "Sometimes they did that." "Did anyone?" he started, then chose a different question. "Do you have an archivist?" "We have me and 2 volunteers," she said, then looked at him the way people do when they place the bruise under another person's skin. "Don't go up there in the fog." He didn't. He drove home. A week later, in the parking garage under his building, the trunk light flicked on as he walked past, triggered by his key fob. He looked in without wanting to. The radio lay in the bag, silent, its rubber antenna bent from time. On the plastic, and the faint residue that dust leaves on plastic that's been outside, were fingertip ovals, 4 in a row, as if someone had rested their hand there for balance. He bought a roll of gaffer tape and wrapped the bag shut and wrote on it in marker, "Do not open." Sometimes at night he will dream a tower's ladder in cold hands and a hatch that opens to a room of windows where the wind is a constant voice. In the dream, a radio crackles. It calls for him in his voice, and in others, some he knows and some he doesn't. When he wakes, he goes to the closet and checks the taped bag without touching it. He hasn't thrown it away. He tells himself he will, every time. Then he tells himself another story, that if he takes it back to the forest and puts it on the concrete pad, some circuit will close, and the voices will go back to being wind. These stories are reported in the tone of true encounters often shared by hikers, campers, and rural residents. Odd human mimicry in forests, unsettling roadside and cabin intrusions, and eerie interactions with old infrastructure where isolation magnifies danger. The details reflect the kinds of experiences that circulate in outdoor communities: footsteps pacing trails, voices or whistles imitated from the dark, suspicious nighttime knocking, and strange finds at abandoned sites, while preserving anonymity and respecting that many incidents lack official resolution. Marisol took a seasonal job in a mountain town and rented a tiny cabin at the end of a decommissioned fire road. The realtor warned that snowplows didn't go that far, and that weekends brought dirt bikes to the national forest. She loved the solitude. Her nearest neighbors were 2 miles downhill, and at night, the ridgeline cut the stars into a black saw. The fire road had a gate most people respected, but there were always signs of trespass: tire chevrons in dried mud, empty beer cans in the ditch, cigarette filters blotted brown. She carried herself with confidence. Learned in cities don't make it easy, and don't look afraid. She hauled groceries on Sundays, stacked her wood, learned the patterns of blue jays and deer, and listened to the small house settle when the temperature fell. One Thursday after dusk, she heard a motor climb the switchback's wrong sound for the valley, sharper, closer. She stepped onto the porch and turned off the interior lights so she could see out. Headlights braided through trees below, then stopped around the second bend where the road traversed a steep cut bank. The motor idled, then revved, then died. Silence dropped hard. Frogs quit. The smell of exhaust drifted up. She waited for the inevitable, Someone cursing a dead truck, doors slamming. The Doppler shout of, "Hello?" It never came. No door opened. No footsteps climbed. The vehicle sat in the dark and made the tiny cooling ticks of metal. Her phone read one bar. She texted her coworker, "Some dumbass stuck on the fire road." No reply. She went inside, locked the door, and set a pot of water to boil, trying not to feed the unease that crept over her skin. The house had good bones, but a bad habit of broadcasting small noises, mice in the wall, limbs scraping the eaves. She told herself she would check again after dinner. When she stepped out 10 minutes later, the headlights were off. The road below was a slick of shadow. The vehicle was now only a heavier piece of dark in the dark. She clicked her flashlight once, briefly, and swung the beam down. Reflectors along the gate flashed white. Just above the second bend, two small glints answered her light, too low and too close together to be a truck mirror. Eyes, she thought, then realized they hadn't blinked. She shut off the flashlight and stood still enough to hear her pulse. A laugh sounded, easy and low, exactly the kind a friend would make if they had sneaked up and surprised her. It came from behind the cabin, not from the road. She turned in place slowly, feeling the boards of the porch under her feet. The laugh came again, farther into the trees, as if coaxing her to step off the safe circle of the house. She swallowed and said, at a volume designed for dogs and creeps, "Hey, not funny, go home." The pines held their breath and didn't answer. She went back inside and called the non-emergency sheriff line. It rang. She got a recording. Rural hours, rural resources. Fine. She dug out a big mag light and laid it next to the door. She put the kettle back on because the act of doing something helped. The cabin clock ticked like a metronome for a violinist who had stepped away. The first real knock came at 11:42 p.m. Not at the door at the back wall of the cabin where the bathroom was. One story up the slope, accessible by a narrow catwalk. 3 slow, heavy knocks, like the sound a fist makes on hollow plaster. She moved with the flashlight and swept the catwalk through the window, careful to keep her body out of the backlight. No shape, no breath smoke, only mist rising off the slope. The second knock came at the front, 2 quick raps on the porch rail, close enough that she felt the vibration through the floor. She stepped back, then forward, then back. Adrenaline scrambled her decisions. She wanted to shout that she had called the sheriff, that she had a dog, that she had a husband. None of those things were true except the first, and even that was a recording. The laugh came again, to her left this time, a little too loud, like a phone speaker half covered by a hand. It carried the strange flatness of something replayed. She pictured a person with their phone cupped, moving around the cabin, pressing play on a recording of a laugh that had never been real in the first place. She stepped into the kitchen, turned the oven on broil for heat and for light, and took the largest knife she owned. She went back to the door and listened. The night held. Somewhere down the mountain, an engine started, maybe the same one. It revved high and then receded. Wrong direction. Not uphill to the cabin, but farther down, away. At 8 a.m. Her phone buzzed. A text from her coworker finally pushed through. "What? You good?" She typed fast. "Someone's messing around outside. Car died on fire road." Then another knock, right next to the front door. So close she could see the wood flecks. She felt something like heat run from the base of her skull to her feet. She set the phone down, grabbed the mag light, and in a motion she had practiced only in imagination, yanked the door open with her left hand and threw the light hard into the night with her right. Pine trunks exploded into white detail. The porch rail gleamed. No person, no animal. Then, past the edge of the porch light, a figure stood at the road's edge, upslope from the gate. Tall, unmoving, shoulders a little too square, wearing what looked like a hood that blended with the dark. The maglite beam washed the figure's face, and for a split second, she thought she saw reflective tape where eyes should be. 2 perfect ovals built to answer light. "Leave," she said, because it was what she had. "Please leave." The figure didn't move. The laugh came again, from somewhere behind her, inside the house. She slammed the door, and ran through the rooms, light scorching the small spaces. Nothing. Nothing under the table, behind the couch, in the bathroom shower. The laugh was gone, but in her memory it had seemed to come from the ceiling. She looked up at 1 a.m. in a quiet cabin and understood she had to make a plan that didn't depend on anyone coming. She blew out the living room lights so she could see outside. She slung on her coat, shoved the knife in the inner pocket and the flashlight in the other, and moved a bookcase quickly but quietly in front of the door. Not as a real barricade, but as a sound trap. Then she slipped through the bedroom window onto the uphill side where the catwalk ran, stayed low, and scanned the slope. Nothing shifted but mist. She didn't go to the road. She moved up into the trees instead, where the chaparral made it hard to walk quietly and even harder to move fast. She knew, in a sudden bright way, that any chase on the open road would be someone else's advantage. In the brush, at least, everyone was clumsy. She climbed 20 yards, then 30, and turned to look back at the cabin. Her windows were dark squares. The bookcase cast a friendly rectangle of shadow. Then, like a stage cue, the porch light flicked on. She hadn't left it that way. She crouched lower. The front door opened inward a hand's width, just enough to make a line of black in the light. She felt the cold interest of being watched. She stayed absolutely still. Minutes grew long. The door didn't move again. The porch light didn't flicker. The figure by the road was gone, or had never been what she thought. She listened until the frogs came back, until tiny night noises brought the world back into its proportions. At dawn, she went down to the road with the biggest stick she could find, because weapons feel better than empty hands. There were tire tracks at the second bend, and a streak where a bumper or undercarriage had slid against the cutbank. There were prints in the mud from old boots and deer hooves. Near the porch, she found a shard of reflective tape stuck to a splinter on the rail, gray in the morning. The kind you put on a jogger's vest. She peeled it off with a thumbnail and threw it in the trash, then fished it out and put it in a plastic bag, then threw it away again. She didn't call the sheriff because she didn't know how to describe what she would be asking them to investigate. She moved 2 weeks later, telling her boss her commute had been too long. Sometimes, far from that cabin at the end of a fire road, she will hear a recorded laugh on a video and feel every hair on her forearms rise as if the woods had walked into the room. Evan was an ultralight backpacker who preferred shoulder season nights when campsites emptied and the trails went silent. He set out alone on a 2-night loop through a state forest known more for logging roads than marked paths. The forecast promised clear skies. The ranger at the trailhead simply said, "Watch your daylight. It disappears fast under the canopy." Evan smiled, signed the register, and stepped into a long corridor of pine and shadow. By dusk, he found a small, dry shelf above a creek. He pitched his tarp, strung his bear line, and cooked quietly with his headlamp snapped off, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. The creek murmured. Wind moved pine boughs in soft rattles. He had hiked alone often enough to read the ordinary woodland noises, rodents and duff, owls, branches settling after heat. Fear, for him, was usually a trick of the first night. When the whistling started, it sounded almost like a bird. 3 notes, descending, a little off-key. It came from upstream, then from downstream, impossibly fast, as if 2 sources were answering each other. He froze with his spoon mid-air. There was another whistle, closer, the same 3 notes. He thought, barred owl? But owls didn't imitate human-sounding patterns quite like that. He decided to try a test. He pursed his lips and whistled a simple 2-note pattern he used to call his dog as a kid. The creek and wind swallowed it. A moment later, the same 2-note pattern came back from the trees, softer, slightly wrong, like someone who'd heard it through a wall and tried to copy it. Evan felt adrenaline prickle in the scalp. He told himself it could be campers messing around on the other bank, or the acoustic oddities of ravines. He clicked on his red lamp and made small, purposeful noise, sealed his food bag, cinched it high on the line, raked leaves away from the stove spot. Then he heard brush compress under weight. Not the scatter of a deer, the careful pressure of a foot adjusting its step. He forced himself to breathe slowly and tapped the metal pot with his spoon 3 bright, carrying notes. Instantly, from the dark, the same 3 pot notes echoed back, only duller, like struck against rock or bone. He packed with shaking hands. Lightness saved him, tarp down, quilt stuffed, stakes ripped out, everything into the pack in under 2 minutes. He could hike by star and creek sound if he had to. He shouldered the pack, turned off the lamp to save night vision, and stepped onto the faint game trail that paralleled the water. The wood's compressed branches brushed his sleeves. Roots tried to hook his toes. The creek was suddenly too loud. He walked quickly, then faster when he heard the footfalls again, paced to his speed, close enough for him to feel the air shift. He took a breath to shout and realized how quiet the forest was. No insects, no frogs. Silence like a lid on a jar. He cut uphill, away from the water, to break line of sound. Deadfall forced him into a ragged zigzag between blowdowns. After 50 yards, he crouched behind a fallen trunk to listen. The footfalls drifted below him, then stopped. He could hear his own blood. He waited, counting. 60 seconds, 90, 2 minutes. The whistling came again, just beyond the blowdown, as if whatever or whoever had kept pace with him without stepping on a twig. The same 2-note call he'd made, repeated 3 times. He closed his eyes, pressed his lips together, and didn't answer. He chose a brutal route, straight up the ridge to intersect a logging spur he'd crossed earlier. He climbed by hands and knees where necessary, tearing his palms on quartz. When he finally crested the ridge and found the old road, his legs shook. He put distance behind him, fast, not running but close to it, scanning for the reflector tack he'd placed in a tree as a personal breadcrumb. It flashed like a tiny star. He turned down a side spur that would, if memory held, meet the marked trail. The whistling followed the road from below, now fainter, now nearer, never breaking the same pattern. At one point, it came from ahead of him, as if something had circled. He thought about the trail register, the ranger's bored face, the way people sometimes went missing for reasons that never resolved into stories. He reached a signed junction relief like heat in his chest and committed to the main trail. The blazes were frequent. The footbed was clear. He moved faster. A mile later, at a shallow saddle, the forest regained its ordinary sounds in a flood. Katydids, a distant barred owl, something small scuttling. The whistling had stopped. He didn't camp. He walked through the night, reached the trailhead at 3:40 a.m., and sat in his car with the dome light on until the sun showed gray through fog. He debated telling someone. He considered the words. A whistle answered me. Footsteps mimicked pot sounds. It would sound unhinged. Maybe someone else was out there and thought the same of him. Back home, he unpacked in the morning light. His pot hung by its handle from the back of his pack. The metal was faintly scuffed, as if something had tapped it very lightly 3 times, leaving a smear that wasn't there yesterday. He cleaned it and put it away. He never went back to that forest. A week later, on a hiker forum, someone posted about hearing a strange 2-note whistle in the same area. In the thread, arguments broke out: owls, pranksters, acoustics. Evan closed the tab and, for a long time, never whistled again.